welcome. I'm Angie Butler. It's Saturday, the 1st of August, 2020, and today I'll be in conversation with artists Jason Urban and Leslie Mutchler. Hi, Leslie and Jason. I asked you to send me some images specifically for this talk, the first of which was to provide an image of your studio, what you consider to be your studio at the moment. I'm looking at your first picture now, and I asked for like a view of the doorway looking into your space. So I can see it's a modestly sized room with a wooden floor. The space is filled with a large wooden top table that doesn't have anything placed upon it. Can you tell me where this room is?
Yeah, it's
our dining room.
It's our dining room right off of the kitchen of our 800 square foot Brooklyn apartment. So it is the space that becomes a workspace for our entire family. It is an IKEA table that has been outfitted with a piece of plywood to make it a little bit larger in our space and a little bit more workable, I would say, like a space for us to actually physically make and do and not feel too bad about what materials we use or how we use those materials on that table. But it's a space that we eat off of. It's a space that we...
Everything. Our son does his homework here.
Yeah, it's our office space. It's
okay. Okay, so you mentioned, I was going to ask, are you the only users of this room? Not, because you said family and your son there. So I wondered, did you choose this space for a particular reason, or is it the only space that's kind of big enough to experiment in?
Yeah, so I mean, we had a studio space in the past. We ended our lease in January because we were going to be doing a residency that we thought we'd be spending a lot of time at. COVID struck and everything got turned upside down. Our apartment is relatively small. There's limited places that we could work, and this was just the logical. I mean, this was where all the normal work was happening, and so it just kind of became the studio space as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just necessity. This is what we have, so this is where we're working.
Right.
Well, I think a lot of people are in the same situation at the moment, or certainly have been. So how often have you used this space for art practice over the past few months? Is it every day, most days?
I would say it varies. It depends upon what we're getting ourselves into. Sometimes it can be daily, and sometimes it can be sporadically. I think what's interesting about this space is that it is sort of a hub, a central space in our home with our family, but it then also provides we're a small unit, but it's a place for us to get together and to work on things together as well. I mean, as Jason said, we had a studio space previously that was separate from our apartment, and we had planned to use this other space at Beaded for a residency, and then, things got shut down in the city. But we actually used this space when we first moved here, too, as our studio space, because we moved from Austin, Texas, where we had a separate studio space outside of our home that we had actually built. And when we got to New York, we had a show coming up, and we very quickly realized we had no space to work in, and we had to figure out a place to work. And so the kitchen table became the place. So we work here a lot, periodically. Sometimes it's really rigorous, and it's all the time, and then sometimes it's a little bit more scattered.
I think over the years we've had a very, volatile is the right word. We've sometimes had space and sometimes we haven't. I think that we're very used to working in makeshift situations.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually like a strength of our collaboration. And so it's not that unusual for us to be like sort of trapped in a kitchen working for a while. This is maybe a little less by choice than it normally would be. Yeah, I think it's been working, but it's very sporadic. I think it comes in waves. Productivity has been coming in waves. And I think that's, we're processing the emotional and sort of like logistical elements of life right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, that's what I was going to say with, like, artists usually have some control over their studio, and often it's a private space where you can get some kind of mental freedom, think through, be reflective in the presence of your work. So what's it been like having this space to work in? I just wonder any challenges that have particularly arisen.
I mean, I think it's challenging. It's not perfect, right? I mean, definitely
Yeah.
having this separate space from our apartment previously, 6 months ago,
Yeah.
made things easier to actually, complete work. But we also, our practice is such that, um, we work toward a show or a residency, and we can, and then we have moments where things are quieter, and we don't necessarily need to be in the studio with a daily practice, or
Yeah.
at least I don't feel as if I have to be in the studio with a daily practice.
I think that's the key thing in terms of understanding the way we work, is that it's very much like project to project.
It's project-based.
Unique goals in any given moment, and it's not about we're not like making paintings where it's about plugging away, working 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day. There are days when we work 16 hours, and there's days that we don't work in the studio at all.
Right.
And it's really yeah, we're like kind of erratic.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we aren't like doing things on the days that we're not in the studio. Like we feed the studio practice in other ways,
Exactly.
through research. But even that's been limited lately, right? Like we can't just go to the library or do site visits somewhere. Yeah, I think probably challenge is similar to many people.
Right.
I think.
Right.
I think we feel fortunate that we have like a safe, dry, comfortable place. We have air conditioning. You know what I mean? We're thankful for what we do have. It is enough for us right now, so we're not complaining about our studio situation. It's in a lot of ways it's like the least of our concerns.
Yeah, I think that over this time there's been a lot of emphasis on the importance of mental health and well-being. If you're a creative person, you need to be in a certain frame of mind to be able to be creative. When I was arranging talking to you, I started going and having a look at your Instagram feeds, and I came across a short 1-minute video that I thought was very uplifting and quite important at these times. So I'm just going to stop sharing now and show the video. I think everyone should watch that at least once a day. So could you tell me a little bit about the video?
Yeah, so what you're looking at is our block in Brooklyn, in Clinton Hill, on St. James, and I think that must have been shot in April.
Yeah, early on.
Yeah, and so, it's a couple weeks after the city has really gone on lockdown, and
things were kind of at their worst at that moment. In a lot of ways. The death toll was really climbing. The hospitals were overflowing. It was a very grim moment.
Yeah, and so New Yorkers were going outside at 7 p.m., as I think they were. Lots of people in other countries were doing as well, as a way to just lend our support through clapping and cheering and, saying thanks, showing gratitude for the essential workers, for people on the front lines that were really working day in and day out to try to make things better for all of us. And so what you're seeing is a really early version. This thing has since modified and has grown, has become much more party-like and it's like a dance party. It's much more of a celebration at this point. We're seeing a decline in our numbers here. People are doing better. People are getting out a little bit more. People are feeling more comfortable. But it's just been such a nice way to be a part of our community. We've gotten to know our neighbors in a way that we never thought we would know our neighbors here.
I mean, we live in a really picturesque neighborhood in Brooklyn. It's like, as you saw from the video, brownstones. It's a few blocks away from Pratt Institute, the art school we work at. And at the time of the video, it was really, like during the day, there was no traffic. People weren't walking. There weren't cars, like parking, which had always been a premium. Suddenly there were lots of parking spaces. So at the time of the video was shot, that 7 o'clock moment when our neighbors who basically had speakers that they used for our annual block party were wheeling their speakers out and kind of calling the neighborhood together. It was a really big deal. It was very emotional every night. As time has gone on, they've had to adjust sort of their schedule. Now it only happens on the weekends. Up until July 4th, our Independence Day, they kept it nightly. And then I think they needed a break. But it sometimes now will last an hour. People come from around.
From everywhere.
We've been joking that it's almost like a rave now in terms of the vibe. It's so much more crowded to a point where we're very glad that we can stand on our stoop and not be on the street. It's a real short outdoor coming together that I think we feel lucky that we have been able to experience it. I know a lot of people whose neighborhoods are not as engaged. So yeah, it's been great. It's been a good thing. I definitely feel like this is a moment where you really appreciate your neighbors so much more.
Yeah, I think we all want to feel connected in a time that we're, not able to physically be connected to one another. So it's a nice way to see faces and hear people and just know that we're all still here and in it together.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been important, as you said, in different countries, people connecting in different ways, and also getting to know people on your block who you might not have done otherwise. It's given a lot of hope in that sense in the darkest times, I think. So I asked you to send me a photo that captures a description of the main process that you've been using. So I've got 2 images that outline separate processes. We'll talk about the other one later, but let's take this one first. So there's a blue spatula, there's what looks like a tea strainer, and some pigments and some binder. It's very intriguing. Can you explain more about these items that you've used a lot during lockdown and what the process is?
Yeah, so you're looking at a bunch of water suspension pigments that are from Guerra Paint in the city, from Manhattan. And we started using these pigments when we started working in residence at Dieudonné last summer in July. We were experimenting with dyeing cotton pulp as well as linen pulp with really intense pigment and making these, we'll kind of look at them probably a little bit later, some collage-based works out of paper. And when our residency sort of came to a halt with everything shutting down in the city in mid-March, we had these pigments that we had brought home from Dieudonné, and we bought a few more from Guerra, and started experimenting with adding them to a really simple concoction of flour, salt, oil, and water, which makes a dough that can be baked at a low temperature in the oven and becomes almost clay-like. When I was little, my mom used to make salt dough. It's called salt dough, that's what we would call it. And we would, instead of Play-Doh, we would play with it and make figurines and make, beads and make all sorts of things. And so it seemed like non-toxic, safe material for us to start working with in our kitchen and to also infuse with color. And it led to, for me at the moment, I needed something that would be meditative, that would take my hands away from my phone, that would take my hands away from my computer, that would take my eyes off of my email and off of my work, and just allow me to make something. And so we started making these beads. We would make batches and batches of salt dough out of varieties of color. We were playing around color mixing and started making beads so that we could make meditation necklaces. For me, it was just a process. I just needed a process to keep myself busy in that early, like during March, April, and into May.
I mean, we've done a couple different things over the last few months, but this is something that I think as a family we were able to work with, like being trapped together. And I think the making is more the meditation than like actual meditation, and at least for me. I think it's like a fun, easy, felt low stakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we weren't investing expensive. We could get what we needed on our one trip to the grocery store per week. You know, flour was something that our grocery store never stopped stocking. Some vegetable oil. So it was really accessible in terms of materials. And again, it was just, I mean, there were enough steps involved in terms of like doing the mixing one afternoon, rolling the balls for 2 or 3 days, and baking them as we made them. Then we would drill out the holes and thread them, and it just, I think like arranging them on the kitchen table. All of this work happened at the kitchen table or at our kitchen counter. And yeah, I think it was just, again, in some ways it's sort of low stakes, but it was a way to explore aesthetics and, you know, kind of play around with things.
Mm-hmm. And I you know, it links to the work that we had just previously, that we still are working on and working toward, and we're working at it today, which is in relationship to dealing with color. And we had just installed a show at NARS Foundation in Brooklyn that came down in February that was about kind of defining or writing our own curriculum for a new kind of color exploration and color teaching. We're both educators, so we think and talk about pedagogy all the time. We're like mired in curriculum and teaching. And so, you know, we've for the last, I'd say year at least, we've been pretty like heavy in research about color and color theory, and you know, I just put this show together at NARS, and so working with color in the kitchen too, and working with a material that was accessible and non-toxic and easy to use. This was a further exploration of that color for us, a further way. You know, we've been doing readings about ways in which you know, you could meditate on color and perhaps actually become that color. And so it's like part of my crazy thinking as we're making these. Like if I made beads with these colors and I meditate on this color for long enough, could I actually put myself in that color? What does that mean to be spiritual and to be thinking about color that way?
Well, and the material roots of color, you know. So we've been exploring geology a lot, and sort of like minerals and some other like sort of like tactile examples of color, and sort of trying to like maybe create our own material color library in a lot of ways is what's happening here. So I don't know how many people will know, but like Dieudonné is relatively a well-known paper making facility here in New York. It's been around for 40 years,
Close to 40.
something. And it's something that we were aware of even as students, and something that a place we visited in multiple locations as it's moved around the city. But at this point, it's just a mile from our home, and we got access through a membership last summer, and were able to be really productive. And again, this is where we were introduced to these pigments, and we really got our hands dirty in terms of making paper and producing things for a very intense month. Based on that, we were awarded a one-year residency this year, which I can't even explain how excited we have been about this.
I bet. it seems to
So,
bring everything together almost that you'd been working towards. Yeah.
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 So, but yeah, so it was really like pretty heartbreaking. We were actually in mid-March supposed to be going back for like a visit to like look at our first big full day of like generative exercises to sort of figure out what we were going to do this year.
Yeah.
And because you work with a master paper maker who's been, Tatiana's been great. Anyway, so I think we were just sort of working with the materials we had from that experience. This photograph is actually, the beads are laying on a really old and kind of moldy pellon that we were using in the paper making process. So like it all kind of feeds together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you were talking about colors and almost imagining yourself as a color, there are those resonances in the strings of beads. When I was looking at some more than others, it's almost like imagining the landscape and the rocks in the landscape. So there's different geologies there and histories that I wonder whether you do really get lost in that when you're making them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with like a really just like exploring color and thinking about what we've made and haven't made yet, and you work in like sort of batches, so you generate a batch of something, and then you sort of respond to that by generating another batch, and then there's this a really like fun day of like sort of laying them all out on the table and sort of coming up with arrangements and compositions and thinking about the pattern and just kind of exploring different things and seeing what I mean, there's no right or wrong, but I think we sort of like gravitate more toward one thing or another thing over time.
I'd like to kind of talk about the shaker inspired rack that the beads are strung on. So that's from your exhibition of 2019.
It's called Long Lost Friend.
Yeah, which is actually based on a book title. Like we worked at the University of Texas at Austin for 10 years, and I think in the US, it's referred to as like a tier 1 research school. So research is really like a critical component of everything that happens at the university, and it's something that I think we were both engaged in prior to arriving there, but I think it's something that's really became so entrenched and ingrained in us. The idea that any of our projects usually start with some basic ideas that sort of, it's an inquiry, right? And so we like find a subject and explore that subject, and somehow that results in physical, visual things, right? And so this was very much like kind of looking at, some Pennsylvania Dutch folk traditions, because Philadelphia is very much connected with that history. And so, but like the Shakers are more of like more New England, but we're kind of pulling together some different American folk traditions in the show that, was at the Print Center in Philadelphia.
Right. And the impetus for this show really came from a show that we had done in Philadelphia a couple years prior, where we had toured Pennsylvania. Even though we're both from Pennsylvania originally, with the middle part, I'm from Western Pennsylvania and Jason's from Eastern Pennsylvania, but the middle swath of the state we didn't spend a lot of time in growing up, but we were aware of, the Pennsylvania Dutch. I mean, my parents had a Pennsylvania Dutch hex sign that hung above the storage shed at the back of the house, and we saw these things growing up, but we didn't really know a lot about them. And so, several years ago, we decided to take a tour of the center part of Pennsylvania, of Lancaster, and some of the surrounding counties, and sort of do a driving tour and take in the Pennsylvania Dutch culture and get more accustomed to the graphics and the color quality. And we did this project called Hex to Hex, Post Hex, that was at Grizzly, which is a gallery in Philadelphia, and this project came out of it. And this is more really thinking about, hex tradition or Pennsylvania Dutch tradition and sort of the spiritual embedded in it. So like we were thinking a lot about totems or artifacts and the magic kind of spiritual connection that you might find in those items.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the title of the show, like there's a book about basically powwows, which are, it's called powwows, and then in parentheses, or long lost friend. And it's a book that was sort of, while there is an author, I think John Homan was the name of the author, it's something that was clearly like very much like a compilation of folk, you know, knowledge, or yeah, various remedies, and so we really used that as this like sort of core source material, and we were thinking about I don't know how we could use all these different threads of inquiry to generate a show for the print center. And so we explore a lot of different kind of print media in this show, but we're also interested in the relationship. I mean, even with the beadwork of like craft to fine art, and as well as like design. And so we're thinking about all these things and pulling them together where it's not like strictly one thing or another thing. We also, the next slide, this slide where you see like this, basically like a low research plinth, where a lot of the materials that generated the show are sort of treated as artifacts, or, you know, sort of, I don't want to use, not a reliquary, but like basically just sort of preserving all these details that generated the show.
Right, and it's a mixture of things. Again, going back to the craft itself, and craft and fine arts. You know, some of these things are found things, but a lot of these things are made things. So like it's hard to see in this image because they're so small, but some of these objects are actually made of Sculpey and were made at the kitchen table, at the studio table that we talked about at the beginning. So going back to using our hands and making objects that way. Some of them are like sort of meant to be, I guess, kind of humorous, or kind of maybe poke fun, or bring a little bit of a critical eye to the idea of the spiritual. For instance, the smudge stick that's sitting on the table, and I think is on the next slide of yours as well, if you want to. I mean, that's made of paper towels that are dyed with pigments to look a little bit more organic or natural. And so playing around with commonly found objects and repurposing them, and again, thinking about the hand in relationship to making. And then this paired with, you know, shaker style furniture, hanging systems, been CNC cut. It's designed in CNC cut, and, you know, like this is a UV printed aluminum plate. So pairing photography with UV printing, digital printing in the background, and just moving back and forth really fluidly between those different worlds.
Or we hope it's fluid anyway. I think, yeah, like just sort of.
It's fluid for us.
Yeah, mashing up media, and sort of like you make something and then you photograph that thing and you print that thing and maybe you photograph it again, and sort of playing with where the original lies. And if you see the gold stone type object with the hole in it in the right hand corner of this image, that's a 3D rendering of an object we made. So the object is in the show somewhere, but there's also like a 3D scan that we've then, you know, like, so this digitized version of it that we've layered into this wallpaper graphic that combines the 3D scanning grid with embroidery templates. So it's, I think we're very interested in like just like kind of mashing up all these sources and hoping they arrive at some sort of new questions, but also some new answers, maybe.
Right.
Yeah. It seems to me also that it's that I can almost feel your phenomenological engagement with everything that you've had in ways of printing and kind of graphic representation of all of these objects and items. And there's so many possibilities for level of engagement in this show. I wondered what your feedback was.
I mean, it was positive. I think it's a little.
That's always a hard one to
answer.
answer.
I mean, I feel like, you know, I think the thing is, I think my general sense is that people can be, I don't know if it intimidated, sort of overwhelmed a little bit, and feel like maybe they need to know more than they actually do. And I think, because to me, I would say the best way to view a piece like this from the outside, I think, would be to just kind of be sort of like a detective and just look for connections. You know, like it's not, you don't need to know what we know to get something from it. I think the idea is that you can sort of move in and sort of find relationships throughout the work. It's meant to be viewed as a whole, as opposed to any single object being critically important. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's like almost like a game. I mean, it's not, we don't really talk about games that way,
No.
but just looking for relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, the important thing to note here, and we don't have a slide of it, but we did make a publication in relationship to this, a Rezo publication, and we use publication. We started with a slide that had books that were in relationship to the show that we were just talking about at NARS about a new color curriculum. Like, we use publication as a way to share research with the world as well through a format that is maybe more digestible than these more abstracted bits and pieces that we cull together in an exhibition.
I think that's like a key word, is that like it's intended to be abstract. Yeah. So it's not about necessarily anyone learning what we've learned, but it's like it's as much just a visualization of us, of knowledge or something, where we're just trying to show you this sort of network of relationships in some way. I mean, aestheticized, but I think that's what it's about. It's not about like figuring it out.
Yeah, that's really useful, I think, for people to know as well of what your expectations are or not of someone engaging with your work. Can we go on to this slide here from the bead work? You've then actually put the beads around a piece of existing work?
Correct. Yeah. So these are the paper works that we were doing last summer while in residence at Beaded. So what you're looking at is a piece of cotton that has been pigmented to a sort of gray lavender color. There's digital image, a digital photograph that we've taken and then printed in inkjet and collaged on top of a risograph print, which is the colorful bars on the white paper. And then the bars of color at the bottom of the piece itself are actually linen pulp paint. So we're using linen pulp as a way to paint directly onto the paper before it's dried, while it's wet, as a way to, again, sort of exaggerate the color quality of the paper and to bring it back to this notion of printed matter.
Yeah, like printer's bars, like some sort of color guide printed on the work.
Yeah, and so when we started making these beaded pieces at home in March, it's sort of as happy accident. We strung the first few and then really didn't know where to hang them or put them.
We have no room.
So we started hanging them on some of these framed works that we had around the apartment, and realized that they had this really nice relationship, not only in color but also in sort of craft physicality.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we didn't know that the work was missing these pieces, but as we, again, like sort of happy accident, like as we started hanging them on the work that was on the walls, then we started like adjusting what we were making in response. So like we started changing color palettes and started really thinking about like, well, what if these works had these like sort of meditative tools attached to them, as like some sort of augmentation, and it seemed to make a lot of sense. So we've kind of pursued it, and we've, I mean, I don't think we really know at this point exactly what the final, I mean, or I don't know if we ever really think of anything as having a final form. But like the shaker reference that you pointed out, that was its utility. Like we have these giant boards that we made for one show, and with some modifications that we made in our kitchen, we like drilled out new holes and put new dowel pegs in them, and so now we have like a place to hang all of the beads, because we don't have room in our apartment to hang all of the framed works we have. So I don't know. I think one of the nice things maybe I would just say right now is that you know, a lot of things are on hold. Like we have a show that was supposed to happen this fall that was pushed back a few days, like a month or something, and then it was immediately pushed back to January. And so who knows? Like, will that happen in January? Will it get pushed back? Like right now, I think the things we're doing um, are for us.
Yeah. Well, and they're to keep us connected to I think our creative community and like our practice of making.
Yeah.
And they're not unimportant. They're
No,
almost
I didn't.
more, yeah, no, they're just, but they're less purposeful, I think, than when we work. As we said at the beginning, we're project based, so we really, when we know we have something to work toward, that's what we do, and that's how we work. I think sometimes our most, if it's most clear, and our best work comes from that. But right now feels like a lot of play, and I think there's something really freeing about that in this moment for us to be able to just take some time and to just kind of play around.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity, isn't it? And something that none of us really would have had or thought of having. But yeah, we can utilize that. I'll just go quickly on to this one where you were saying about with the previous slide of then changing the color palette. So is that what you're doing here? We're back on the kitchen table, but in a completely different guise here.
Yeah. So you can.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot. I mean, we do a lot of photography in our work, although neither one of us would ever call ourselves photographers.
Never.
But yeah, this is literally like taking the wooden tabletop off the original IKEA table, and then we have like a studio setup in terms of lights and tripods and everything. And this is actually making photographic works in response to the paper making work. So like we would take a paper making piece and then sort of rebuild the different bits of it and the color relationships of it using some of the original materials that were in. It's so much of like just kind of this back and forth movement of like taking photographs of books and then printing out those photographs and collaging them into paper and then taking new photographs of the books to make works that are meant to stand alone as photographs. It gets kind of confusing even explaining it, but
it's related to what we were just talking about in terms of play. Like this is a part of our practice where, this was again in preparation for the show that was up in January at NARS, where we wanted to make a couple photographic works in relationship to the paper works. Again, thinking about their differences and similarities in relationship between craft and fine arts, thinking about the paper really as being sort of craft and being about the physicality, the tangible, the making. I mean, it's so, being in a paper making studio is so laborious and hands-on and physical. And, making a photograph it can be, but it's not in this instance. It's much more about play and quick relationships and, yeah, exactly. Digital experimentations and light experimentations. And so this is like a big, it's the other half of our practice. Yeah. It's the other way in which we build new content for ourselves or find new relationships. And it's all about experimentation, really.
Yeah, and the image that's up right now, I don't know what that is. It's just like, it's like a thing that we were just playing with light, RGB and some props that we have developed that, that's that disc that you see there is laser cut. We had that laser cut based on a very strange Munsell diagram that was trying to explain color using a human hand, poked through this disc. We saw the illustration, which did not conform to normal human anatomy, and thought, well, let's make one of those and see what we can do with it. Mm-hmm. So this isn't necessarily art, but it's just a sketch or an idea that may turn into something. But
right.
But I think that's where we're at right now, where we're just kind of playing with some different things, and I don't know. So, we've actually talked about quite a lot, but then we're also juggling the weird other normal life, the stresses of not knowing what this fall really holds for us.
Right.
Yes, that's what I wanted to ask you is, you were saying about possibilities for exhibition next year. Is there the possibility of rearranging the paper residency, or is that just off the table now?
No, we actually just, my son and I walked, Leslie was in a Zoom meeting, of course, and we walked down to the paper making facility and met our paper maker outside, where she was able to hand off the batch of things that we were working on, so that we could actually see them.
Because we haven't seen them since
Yeah, so
March.
literally this just happened a couple of days ago, and we're gonna look over. I mean, we've already started looking it over, but we've got our experiments, and we're gonna have a meeting with her in the next week or two, and then probably this fall.
Via Zoom. Zoom.
Yeah, we'll meet with her via Zoom, but probably with, you know, fingers crossed, this fall we should be getting back into the studio. It's like, are we going to get like the solid year that we expected? Probably not, but they seem committed to, like, you know, affording us an opportunity to continue working. And
right.
So I think we're pretty confident that we'll be making more work there. And, you know, I think everybody taking it sort of one day at a time.
Exactly.
Just sort of
one day
what
at a
happens.
time is the new motto of everyone. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not smart to really do too much planning right now.
Yes, well, maybe that's a lesson to all of us, isn't it? You know, that this time has given us to, you know, value our time a little bit more and take that consideration if we want to. But that's great news that you've started conversations up and there's possibilities there to reconvene with the paper facility. We'd be really interested to see any results of that next year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Jason and Leslie, thank you so much for joining me today and just being so candid about your thoughts, your processes, what you've been working on in your practice, and also how open that you've been in sharing that with everyone. So you'll just have to imagine an audience with me clapping now to say thanks so much. That was great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. And all the work that, you know, just having us here is great.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I have to say, like, maybe the most fun I've had in months.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.